Name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. Arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan, with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw them with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told to me. In wisdom and wealth, you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your men must be, how happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices and precious stones. Never again were so many spices brought in as those the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Hiram's ships brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great cargoes of almug wood and precious stones. The king used the almug wood to make supports for the temple of the Lord and for the royal palace, and to make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much almug wood had never been imported or seen since that day. King Solomon gave the queen of Sheba all that she desired and asked for, and then some, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she left and returned with her retinue to her own country. We want to use this text as just a bit of a backdrop tonight as we think together about the question, what's on your mind? What's on your mind? Because we are reminded that when the queen came, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Let us pray. God, we thank you for this day and this time. We ask you continue in this late hour to open our hearts, our minds, our ears, and our spirits, that we might receive what you are saying to us this day and respond in accordance with your perfect will. In Jesus' name, amen. So in our text today, we find the Queen of Sheba, also known as the Queen of the South, the Queen of Egypt, and the Queen of Ethiopia, and even Makeba. Now, for years, scholars have debated her ethnicity as to whether or not she was Arabian or African. So for me, being part of a seminary, Christian theological seminary, where we're blessed to have a wonderful community of scholars and students and friends who have come this evening in support, and even a Bible scholar in Dr. Russell. She joins the chorus of the many scholars that have gone before, like the late Dr. Kane Hope Felder, the renowned African-American biblical scholar who taught at Howard University for 35 years. He writes in his book, Troubling Biblical Waters, that quote that says, from all the data that's been surveyed thus far, it would appear that the ancient Queen of Sheba was indeed of Negro ancestry. Now, this was the belief of Josephus, of Origen, and Jerome. These are church fathers from antiquity. And it has also been the belief of Ethiopians, whether Christian or Falasha. It has been the belief of the American Black church. Thus, it is not at all surprising that in her celebrated volume titled, "Beautiful Also Are the Souls of My Black Sisters," Janine Noble insists that the Queen of Sheba is also a beautiful black sister. And this beautiful black sister in our text today was on a mission. She'd heard about King Solomon, this man of mixed ancestry, and all of his alleged wisdom and wealth. But up until that time, it was just all hearsay. He said, she said, and she wanted to find out the truth for herself. So she set out for Jerusalem with all of her queenly accoutrements and went on to talk to King Solomon. I can only imagine that Solomon's folks were probably seeing her vast caravan for a mile away and wondered, who is that rolling up here like this? They soon came to know that it was the queen, who came to see for herself what the hype was all about. Now, the text says that she came bringing gold and spices and precious stones, but for me, that wasn't the greatest value what she brought that day. For the greatest value, as I see it in my interpretation, is that she came to Solomon to talk about what was on her mind. This black woman was not only beautiful, she was an intelligent, thinking woman. When Solomon met Sheba, it was two beautiful, intelligent, black and brown people reasoning together. Now, I've been drawn to this text for the past few weeks because it seems as though that this is just one of the few texts where we see an example, even if it's just for a moment, where we see mutuality and respect and affirmation between a man and a woman. We already know the culture of this time and of this era, and text after text we see subjugation and oppression, but I don't say this to imply that Solomon didn't have a whole lot of other drama going on in his life, nor that Sheba must have been a perfect person, but what I'm saying is that in this text, in this small portion of it, we see in this moment that this man and this woman were embodying mutuality and respect as black and brown people. Friends, I want to suggest to you tonight that if we are going to adequately address that question that Marvin Gaye asked almost 50 years ago. What was the question? What's going on? When Brother Gaye surveyed the community and looked around him, this was 50 years ago. And he put his feelings into song and sang his heart out about the injustices. If we're gonna be serious about addressing that question 50 years later, so that 50 years from now our children are not still addressing that same question, we're gonna have to do it together. If we were to open our eyes and look all around and see, we would see that 50 years later that the community is still on fire. There is no facet of our shared life that 400 plus years of the reign of white supremacy and burgeoning greed have left untouched. Last week, Roland Martin stood in this pulpit and talked about a need for a radical reprogramming of our people. So I ask us today, what's on your mind? For you see, if we don't get clear about what's on our minds, how are we thinking? How are we seeing? How are we interpreting what's going on around us? How will we know what needs to be reprogrammed? If we can't take stock and have some real critical and honest dialogue about not only what the problem is, but how we got here, how will we be able to chart a path forward so that our children and our children's children can live into a future filled with hope? For white supremacy has done its work on us. Since Africans were brought enslaved to this stolen land, we're stripped away from our homes, our networks of support, our customs, our cultures, our language. Ever since then, we've been navigating a system of racial terror that has been wreaking havoc on our minds, our bodies, and our spirits. In her riveting book titled White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of the Racial Divide, Dr. Carol Anderson lays out the ways in which, ever since Reconstruction, after every perceived movement forward for African Americans, it was met with a swift and opposite reaction of vengeance. Some call it backlash. Others call it something else. But nonetheless, with every step of perceived progress, Dr. Anderson lays out for us that it's immediately met with a vengeance retaliation. You see, instead of going from enslavement to freedom to Reconstruction, we went from Reconstruction right into convict leasing and into Jim and Jane Crow laws. Now, after all of the movement from the civil rights, the act was passed and affirmative action began. We go from Thurgood Marshall to Clarence Thomas. We're soon met with the faux war on drugs. We do know that was a faux war, right? When we talk about this reprogramming and understanding, we do know during that era when President Ronald Reagan was calling black women welfare queens, and people were saying that black people and drugs were the menace to society and that we have to stop them and lock them up and put them away forever. We declare a war on drugs. Well, as Michelle Alexander and others have helped us to know, that white people use drugs at the same rate, if not more, as black people. And that if this was a real war in the 70s and 80s and 90s, they'd have been kicking in college dorm doors at Butler University, at IUPUI, at Purdue, at Ball State, not here on neighborhoods on the east side. If it was a real war. So we go from this faux war on drugs, we go from the civil rights movement, all of the efforts and the ways that we were moving forward with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and affirmative action, to now coming up on this war on drugs, and the affirmative action doors start closing and the privatized prison doors swing wide open. If all of that was not bad enough, and it was. So the next time somebody looks at a brother or a sister and says, "What's wrong with them? Why can't they act right?" Do not ask what's wrong with them. As my husband says, ask what happened to them. Because if all this was not bad enough that I just talked about, after the first black president served for 8 consecutive years with no scandals, no indignities, spoke with regard for his fellow human being, and did so in complete sentences, showed genuine affection for his wife and for his daughters, and even released his tax returns, the rage and response that this black Harvard-educated lawyer was met with, who prides himself, is met with somebody who prides himself in being as rude and as crude as possible, as dishonest and lording over the federal government like a mob boss over an organized crime ring. White rage. What Dr. Carol Anderson talks about. the response to black progress. How dare that black family live in the White House? We'll show you whose house it is. White supremacy has done a number on this country. And while we're talking about the White House and the government and politicians, Pastor Williams has already said a word about voting. And we know that in a democracy, votes are supposed to count. And we also know that in this country, that although we are supposed to be living in a democracy, as we saw in the year 2016, when in Georgia, Stacey Abrams had gained so much momentum in Georgia running for the governor's seat that all they could find to do was figure out a way to kick people off the rolls. In the state of Florida, where Andrew Gillum had gained so much momentum in moving forward to being elected toward the governor of that state of Florida, all they could find to do was to change the laws. Friends, what we know is that this trickery is not going to end. And so what that means, as they've upped their game, we've got to up our game. They've proven there's no do-right in them. There's no do-right in those who are charged to govern and rule with fairness and dignity and honesty. We just had an impeachment process where no witnesses were permitted to be called. That's not a just system. And since we know this, again, what's on your mind? Since we know this, how shall then we live in response to it? So yes, we have to get registered to vote. And not only go vote, but take 2 and 5 and 10 and 20 people with us. It's not enough to just hold into oneself and say, I vote. You're the reason because you didn't vote last time. That's why he's in. Listen. It's not just about what I do or what you do. It's about what we do. Unless we're mistaken, in this state of Indiana, it is a voter suppressing state. And you say, what do you mean by that? Ain't nobody suppressing my vote. I was able to vote. We have a voter ID law. It's already proven that voter IDs are suppressive. We know this. So what do we need to do? We need to be asking everybody we know and everybody we don't know, do you have a valid government-issued ID? Do you have this real ID that is required for everybody in the state of Indiana to be able to vote? If you don't have it, here, let me take you to get it. You need to go get your birth certificate? Let's go to the county health department. You need to go to the DMV? I'll help you get there. We don't need our people, first of all, walking any of these streets without any legitimate ID. We know the tactic. They done played their hands 100 times. We know the tactics. And so then what will we do? We have to up our game. As we're upping our game, I just need to make mention that we need not fall prey to thinking that any candidate is entitled to our vote. I need us to be real clear that there is an agenda that the corporate media has in terms of the candidates that they want to win. And I need us to be clear that the candidate that they want to win might not be the candidate that's the best one for black and brown people in this country. And so we need to put on our minds, we need to do our own work and push past the hype when people are saying, socialism, oh, that's horrible. Really? What's so bad about everyone having access to health care? What's so bad about free college tuition? What's so bad about efforts that are made to close the wealth gap instead of expanding it? What is so bad to have regulatory practices so that the deregulation of every industry in this country doesn't continue to negatively affect us? What's so bad about people who have billions of dollars paying 0.5% of their fair share of taxes? What's so bad about that? I haven't gotten an answer to that question yet. But yet I have to sit and listen to these folks. I'm not talking about on Fox News. The country doesn't want socialism. Well, if the country didn't want socialism, the government wouldn't be bailing out Wall Street banks. It wouldn't be bailing out the airline industry. It wouldn't be bailing out all these corporations. What do you think that is? You want to bail out somebody, bail out all the people who are saddled in student loan debt. You want to bail out somebody, we got money to build a wall. We got money to increase military spending. The deficit is over $1 trillion. But he says he's going to give health care for everybody. How are you going to pay for it? That question only gets asked of people that are seeking to implement policy for the least of these. All right, so we're going to get our real IDs, right? Right? I mean, I've got mine over there somewhere, but it's not about just me, right? Every 18 and up old person you know, get their IDs, get them registered, get them to the polls, and get them engaged. Help them to understand why this matters. All right, I'm hustling. If we're going to survive, this is school night, and thrive into the future, it's going to take all of us, friends. Listen. It can't be this East Coast, West Coast stuff. It can't be black men versus black women, or black women versus black women, or black men versus black men. We have to recognize and reclaim the roots from which we've come. That the cultural norm of Ubuntu that says I am because we are, not me, myself, and I, or my four and no more. We have to recognize the full humanity within ourselves, first of all, and then also in each other. Now, we know that the Constitution may have labeled us as 3/5 of a human being, but we are not 3/5 of anything. We are full human beings created in the image of God. But we've got to live into that each and every day in each and every way. Why? Because white supremacy has done its work. It's done its work in making us think that we are each other's enemy. When the enemy is poverty, when the enemy is underfunded schools, when the enemy is food deserts, when the enemy is poor health care, those are the enemies. When the enemy is flooding our neighborhoods with illegal guns, our children aren't the enemy. We are not the enemy. What's in your mind? What do we need to do to see each other and be with each other? I was drawn, like I said, to this text with Solomon and Sheba, because for a moment, seeing this woman, this man, this black woman, brown man together in mutuality and respect, affirming and regarding each other. How much more do we need that right now in this era of the real fake housewives, where women black women on there spitting, cursing, cutting, throwing, conniving, putting in our girls' minds that that's what it means to be in relationship with your sister. The devil is a lie. In this age of music that encourages young black men to, let me kill you, men, you know the words. He's not some that you need to That's your brother. He's not your enemy. And until we go at every single one of these media organizations that continue to promulgate and peddle this nonsense to our children and our young people, what else are they going to continue to think? If that's all they turn on and see, it's not like there's any balance. We've got to see first the humanity in each other, the humanity in ourselves, realizing and remembering that we are all in this together, regardless of whether you live on the east side, the west side, the south side, the far north side, Kokomo, Terre Haute, Chicago, St. Louis, Atlanta, LA. We are in the same boat. We've got to stop this black men versus black women nonsense. Stop it. We are each other's people. And we need to be doing anything we can to support and affirm and encourage each other. It takes all of us together. It's Angela Davis and it's Amos Brown. It's Bell Hooks and it's Brian Stevenson. It's Constance Baker Motley and it's Charles Hamilton Houston. It's Dorothy Height and it's Dick Gregory. It's Ella Baker and it's Elijah Cummings. It's Fannie Lou Hamer and it's Fred Hampton. It's Gwendolyn Brooks and it's Gardner Taylor. It's Harriet Tubman and it's Henry McNeil Turner. It's India Ari and it's Isaac Hayes. It's Joanne Robinson and it's Jesse Jackson. It's Katherine Johnson and it's Kenneth B. Clark. It's Lisa Leslie and it's LeBron James. It's Mary McLeod Bethune and it's Medgar Evers. It's Nina Simone and it's Norman Whitfield. It's Osceola McCarthy and it's Otis Moss Jr. It's Prathia Hall and it's Paul Robeson. It's Queen Latifah and it's Questlove. It's Ruth Smith Lloyd and it's Ronald McNair. It's Shirley Chisholm and it's Stokely Carmichael. It's Toni Morrison and it's Thurgood Marshall. It's Unita Blackwell and it's Udozima Awiala. It's Vanessa Bell Calloway and it's Ving Rhames. It's Whitney Houston and it's Wynton Marsalis. It's Yvonne Delk and it's Yusuf Salam. It's Zora Neale Hurston and it's Ziggy Mogley. From A to Z, it's all of us together, men and women and boys and girls, realizing that we are all God's children. So it's time for us to get together, children. Put away all this foolishness. Put away the corporate America's agenda that has you thinking that she's your enemy and that he's your enemy. And let's get busy dealing with the real enemy that's before us. What's on your mind? We got to get the right things on our mind. We got to resist this foolishness, this nonsense. Some people say when you know better, you do better. I don't believe that. There's a whole lot of folk that know better and still don't do better. I've now lived long enough and have enough gray hair to know that it's not just when you know better, you do better, but you do better when you make a conscious decision to do better. What's on your mind? What's going on? Let's not have to have our children asking that questions 50 years from now. God bless you.